Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Wang, to give us this very special opportunity to continue our conversation from the talk. We have a lot of things that we have really already talked about in the talk, but in your talk and also many of your publications, you advocate translanguaging as a methodological strategy for a decolonized language curriculum. And also you analyze the data from both the teachers' perspectives as well as how students agentively use the translanguaging practices in the language classrooms. So the first question that I'm very interested about is what initially brought you into investigating and also implementing the translanguaging approach in the Chinese language classrooms?
Thank you so much, Dr. Wang. um, uh, it's really my pleasure to have this opportunity to talk about my understanding of translanguaging theory and the new trend, or the kind of a deeper thinking about how to use the concept in mostly in Asian language teaching and learning, because we have a lot of discussion about the concept in global north, usually about bilingual and multilingual programs, and for newly migrated students who couldn't speak the language in the host country. So, and also for minority students, for example, in America, in the UK, in Europe. But we rarely have this discussion about how to, how teachers and students think about this new theory and this new kind of practice in the classroom. So I think this is a kind of a different conversation, and the purpose and intention,
Mm-hmm.
of having this discussion here. So I wanted to, at the very beginning of our a little interview, I want to clarify this. This is,
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about the concept in a different context.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, for personally, for an Asian scholar or Asian language teacher walked into this translanguaging trend, there
Mm-hmm.
must be some deeper level engagement or involvement with something in their teaching and classroom. So personally, I think this is really something that I've been thinking and working on in the past almost 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So even before we have this translanguaging concept, I was working on my PhD dissertation about teachers using a different language in the classroom to help students learn an Asian language. So in my case, it's Chinese language. So this is, I wanted to say, no matter for my research or for my teaching, I see translanguaging as a reality,
Mm-hmm.
not as a newly invented phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
This is what something that teachers have been doing, and all the teachers are kind of consciously or unconsciously incorporating this kind of concept in their practices.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this could be a little problematic if we pitch translanguaging as a new approach, as a fancy a pedagogy or something that a researcher introduced to teachers in a classroom. This is not really the way that we should see translanguaging. So what got me into this research is based on really what I do in my own classroom. So I started teaching Chinese about 18 years ago. It's quite a long time. So
Yeah.
when I finished my undergraduate degree, I was an English major. So I have a group of NET teachers. So they are called native English teachers from the United States. And then they were in my university back in Beijing, Renmin University. And then they wanted to learn the local language. They wanted to learn some Mandarin so that they could better understand the students in the classroom. But they couldn't find a teacher, at that time, who could use their language to teach them the Chinese language.
Mm-hmm.
So they found me because I was an English major, and at that time, I was the only students from a non-Chinese major background to study how to teach Chinese as second language. So I started my teaching in that way because all the kind of students in my classrooms, they were my teachers. So I spent a lot of time, observing them, wanting to, figure out what kind of, ways that they have and they could bring into the classroom, and how to help them transfer the kind of knowledge or the linguistic resources into their own teaching. So I think this is the very beginning that I kind of noticed that there are a lot of translanguaging practices in the classroom. So back then we call them code switching.
Yes.
Because we saw languages as different, separate entities. They kind of stored in different containers. But gradually, you realize that this is how you do your job. And this is how your students manage to learn the language. So in the very beginning, they couldn't really tell that, like Chinese here, English there. So they're trying to merge the two different worlds so that they can find the link between the Chinese culture and the English culture, and to figure out how to use their own linguistic resources in their own teaching. So this is the very beginning that, as a teacher and also as my students who are also my teachers are thinking about, wow, this is really something that is different from how we were trained to teach a language. So even back then, it's almost 2005, the immersion approach was kind of started to get popular in China. So a lot of us were trained to say immersion approach as the most effective approach in language teaching. So we had a lot of struggle at that time, whether this is the correct way to do, or which one gonna be effective in the classroom. So this is how the beginning for me, to think about translanguaging as just as a reality in the classroom. And also, as you can see from my research papers, when I actually observe teachers teaching, there's a discrepancy from what teachers said. Almost all the teachers would say, I wanted to maximize the target language use. But when they actually were teaching the language, there are a lot of translanguaging, there are a lot of code switching, because we didn't know what they think about the language. We couldn't decide whether this is code switching for them or translanguaging for them. So this is, from my own experience and also from my research, we can tell translanguaging is not an invented reality. It is something that we have been doing in the classroom. So I think that's part of your first question, and also for how we see translanguaging as a decolonizing approach. This is kind of in the recent years we have some new research in coming out, talking about that the diversity, not only at the linguistic level, but in a deeper level, like knowledge level and thinking level, epistemological level. So we needed to, for language teaching, we shouldn't really just look at how students use the language, but also how they use the language to change their mind or to make their world more diverse when they look at other people and other culture, and be more respectful and more open-minded. So this is really how translanguaging can do, because in the beginning we didn't really think about translanguaging as such a powerful concept in language teaching, but apparently the concept can go far beyond classroom. Even we can use that at the policy level, at the government level. We can change a lot of things. So this is especially for Asian language teaching. We've been very, very busy trying to learn from how English it is taught globally. So we wanted to borrow all the good practices from English language teaching. So we really had no time to think about how, as another big language in the world, how this language can contribute to second language teaching and learning. What are the unique approaches that Chinese can bring to language education or applied linguistics research? Because our teachers are busy learning uh, the English teaching approaches, the dominant second language teaching methodologies. So, and also back in the classroom, and they had no time, and really they're not encouraged to have spent time with students, trying to develop a theory and produce knowledge, because they wanted to do the immersion approach, because that's going to define how successful or professional they are in the classroom. So we have, when you spend all the time on learning from other people and seeing your approach as unmodern or unscientific, and then you kind of all focusing on criticizing yourself rather than trying to find opportunities or develop any transformative approations in changing your approach and developing new theories. So this is really what I want to say for translanguaging as decolonizing approach. We hope, when teachers and students in the classroom, they can bring their own cultures, they can bring their own knowledge and language. And this is the starting point for them to see and to explore different approaches and different thinking. So I can see, wow, the diversity can really happen in the language classroom at a much deeper level, rather than, I allow students to use their first language in the first 5 minutes, and then I just close that session and everybody start this immersion approach. This is not really what translanguaging advocates. So I think there's going to be some fundamental changes to our teacher education, this kind of program and this training, and also to help students, change their minds. But we shouldn't really wait until higher education, to help students see the world as it is. I think we should really encourage school teachers on board in this translanguaging project or decolonizing project.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer. There's a lot of things I want to follow on upon the what you just said. But I do agree, like the immersive approach, the so-called the monolingual target-only language approach, is actually was developed from the previously the English Chinese translation approach, right? And then now we have adopting the translanguaging approach into the language teaching. And also, you mentioned that Professor Li Wei talked about the breakdown, the boundary of named language is not just your first language and the target language, right? But it's in practice, it's can be really hard. You already mentioned that students in the language classroom have really a diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds, and we should, as educators, we should bring all of these linguistic and cultural backgrounds into the language classrooms, right? So we are hoping to change the kind of monolingual ideology in the language classroom. In your talk, the New Zealand government provides a great framework to incorporate the moral component into the language classrooms. But for a lot of like Anglophone countries or a region that still perceive English as the dominant language in higher education and in the area, how to let educators actually avoid creating just a very simple, just the English target language translanguaging situation, like how do educators just avoid just simply just let's do not avoid using English situation, rather than actually encouraging students to bring in their own linguistic resources to help them learn and succeed?
Oh, yes. I think, to to break the boundaries and push the limits, as this is the phrase that Li Wei and Angel Lin, both of the leading scholars, used in one of their papers. I think, to change a game and be the game changer, there will be a lot of challenges for second language educators. As I said, this is a starting point for a lot of educators and language teachers and policymakers to think about, how to make a change. Because in my talk in the very beginning, I said there's a continuous decline of foreign language learning because more and more, students couldn't see why they have to do a second language, how this learning going to change, help them see the world in a different way, because it's all about making money, finding jobs. And apparently learning a foreign language couldn't really just, land them a job. So apparently we need to look at foreign language learning in a more open-minded way, rather than just focusing on the market, on getting somebody becoming more competitive. So this is something already, it's not a new project that for foreign language teachers and educators to think about. So the translanguaging concept, it's giving us a chance to think about how to fundamentally, transform our language teaching practices. So this won't be easy for any country, for any culture, for any classroom, any teacher to immediately make a change. So this is to tell us we could see the world in a complete different way. So it's giving us an opportunity rather than just like a tool. For example, I give you a new textbook, you just follow this textbook, and then you can teach in a different way. But this is translanguaging can do way more than just a methodology, than just a pedagogy, the popular pedagogies that everybody knows. So that's why we have a lot of misunderstandings about what translanguaging really is. How can teachers do this? Because we're kind of expecting there will be something ready that they can just pick it up and put it in the classroom, voila, make a change. So that wouldn't be something like that. So my thinking is, first of all, we need to work with teachers and students. And that's why you see a lot of my publications actually classroom based. So I work with teachers, I work with students. I think, first of all, before we kind of impose or prescribe anything to teachers and students, we need to know what they what they think about language teaching and learning, and what their classroom teaching, their ordinary classroom teaching has been, look like. They probably have been doing something that you don't know. So I think the first thing we need to avoid is to prescribe translanguaging as the most effective approach, because this is really a neo-colonial way of thinking. In language teaching, we shouldn't really continue this race about, we have a new approach and then we replace the previous one. So this is not what translanguaging pedagogy or approach is trying to do. So we work with teachers. First of all, we need to give teachers some suggestions, for example, to better understand your classroom language practices. So because I work with school teachers, so the first thing they asked me, when they said, hey, how about you tell me what to do, something about translanguaging? And I said, very first step is to record your classroom conversation. You just put a recorder or your phone there, and then you go back, and if you have time, you just transcribe every single word you said in that 15 minutes. And no matter it's an immersion approach you're using, or kind of a more bilingual or multilingual approach, and then you see how much first language or second language you're actually using, because this is something you can see. But translanguaging is a concept you can't see. So if you ask teachers to do this, they usually come back with two responses. One, I never know, as I kind of used so much target language. Probably most of it, students had no idea what I'm talking about, because they just wanted to keep speaking the target language so that it can provide a more immersive environment.
Mm-hmm.
But when the instruction language is difficult or harder than the language that students are actually learning, so that part of input is completely useless. You're
Mm-hmm.
just going to overwhelm your students.
Mm-hmm.
And the other group of students going to come back to you and tell you, oh, I have no idea. I actually have a lot of students speaking in my classroom, and sometimes I don't know what they're talking about. But this classroom is really, linguistically diverse in terms of what they're saying in the classroom, and I'm little struggle. I'm struggling with how to, use students' linguistic resources for teaching and learning. So we can say teachers actually they're trying to explore what's going on in the classroom. So they know actually students are speaking a lot of languages, and always a little anxious when they, ask students, hey, how about you bring something from your home, from your background, from your heritage, and then you contribute to, for example, Chinese language classroom. So what if a lot of students are using their home language and have no idea what they're talking about? So this kind of level of concerns. So there's nothing to be concerned about, because whether you allow them to speak or not, they are thinking in that way. So it's just like they are speaking to you in the classroom, or they are keeping the thought to themselves. So why don't you, give them a chance just to use a few words to tell them who they are? It should be fine. So talking about students, I think what I've been doing is to ask students to do the language portrait with their teachers in the classroom. So students gonna have this human shape drawing, and then they can tell a story based on how many languages they can speak, or how many languages been around them, growing up in their family. Could be from their parents, their other siblings, grandparents mostly. And then you can tell, and students gonna tell a story about their background. And then the teachers would, usually find this is a very rewarding and very valuable experience at the beginning of the language learning journey, to learn, how many languages and how diverse their classroom is. So, based on this, and teachers can decide, how about we do some projects like this, and then a group of students can work on that because of the resources, linguistic resources they have. But we're gonna, need to be a little careful about, being too diverse in the language classroom, because we only have a limited time.
Yes.
Sometimes 40 minutes, 50 minutes, because we have a curriculum, we must, finish everything in the course outline. We have to teach them. So, and that's why we need a little bit guidance, someone who knows how to develop new approaches. We need to work with teachers. So I don't think translanguaging would be something that a school teacher can just pick it up and put in the classroom, as I said. But we need to, as scholars, we need to work with them. And then we can, get some teachers are more comfortable with this kind of approach, and then they can come out and share with other teachers. So gradually we're changing the language teaching practices. And it's not really, we should maintain the hierarchy in the classroom and the power distance between teachers and students. So because in the New Zealand context, we had a lot of these opportunities that teachers are learning from their students, because the core value in translanguaging theory is co-learning, and also kind of co-theorizing, like knowledge or pedagogy. So this is about everyone playing an equal role in language learning, and also everything else, I think, in education, in other organizations. So this is trying to advocate that everyone's language and culture and knowledge system, civilization, should be viewed as equal participants. So this
Mhm.
is really the essence of decolonizing our approaches. So this is what we want to advocate, not universal approach, but
Mhm.
pluriversal approach. So
Mhm.
if everybody's in a classroom from a different background, and then everyone has a say, about how they should learn and how they find better for them to learn a language or a skill or a content area of knowledge. So yes, it wouldn't be easy, but there are something that we can work with teachers and what we can do with our own teaching. One
Mhm.
last point is we can't just leave this to classroom teaching. We need to think about a way to incorporate translanguaging into assessment.
Mhm.
So because for a long time assessment is only about target language. So if you don't produce the target language, you are not producing any learning evidence. um, but I think promoting translanguage in classroom teaching, but when we finish all the teaching and there's assessment and the final exam, and everybody goes back to its traditional approach. So what's the point of doing translanguaging? It's going to be just a facade, just a superficial level. It won't make any transformative or deeper level of changes to our practices. So there'll be probably another interview with you to talk about assessment.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
that's a very interesting point. As a matter of fact, we actually at Stony Brook, we're actually doing an intervention project. I think Agnes already
Mm.
mentioned that before. We are hoping to change the first beginning levels language classroom by incorporating more social linguistic ideological questions for
Mm.
students to think about. So we have the discussion forums that they can choose to use whatever languages they're comfortable to use. They can mix the English, Chinese, etc. But the most important part for assessment for those discussions are their ideas. So it doesn't matter if their language are correct or not, they use the target language appropriately or not. But as long as they express their ideas
Mm.
about and how and especially bringing their life experiences into the thinking. For example,
Mm.
thinking about the question that you already mentioned, that where are you from? The questions that we often ask the students to learn at the very beginning of the Chinese class. Where are you from?
Mm.
So is these questions appropriate? When we ask these questions, to whom, right? So students actually bringing a lot of their own experiences into the discussion. So that reminds me of what we're doing about the intervention project here. So
Mm.
we're hoping like to add the social linguistic perspectives into the curriculum for students to really think about what the language could be used and why they use the language for what. So a lot of interesting questions to incorporate here.
Yes.
So so I hear like a lot of like criticism about the monolingual ideology and also the target language only immersive approach in the language classroom, right? And you also mentioned the example in your talk. We all know the professor. So I'm a study abroad researcher. I also do a lot of intensive language programs. A lot of students in the intensive language program, they have different needs because they want to use the time either to experience the getting the experience out in the target language country, or just use the specific amount of time to quickly improve their language proficiency. So
Mm.
do you think that the translanguaging practices could also be used in such an intensive or study abroad context? Because I
Mm.
think a lot of like immersion, the emphasis on immersion is actually a selling point for a lot of intensive
Yes.
programs, right? So how do
You're
you
very
see
right. You're very right. Um, because we wanted to, this is like a market-driven model, because behind immersion approach, the concept is this is the most effective approach, because it's based on the second language learning hypothesis. You feel you have, for example, a bread maker. You have a lot of input, and you open the lid, voila, output. So you don't really know what's going on in between from input to output. So we have a lot of this input and output hypothesis. We just assume, we give more input and then students will give us more output. So, but human beings, are more complex than, complicated machine than a bread maker. So I think we shouldn't just, assume that given our background, upbringing, identity, gender, all those kind of things, that everyone would, fit well into this input-output hypothesis. So, but as a selling point, there's absolutely no problem with it. I think we need a lot of different types of language programs. And if some students find it more effective, then go for it. So I think for translanguaging researchers, we wanted to say it cannot be the only approach or the only, kind of effective approach that every teachers want to use in the classroom. And if they are not doing it, they're going to feel super guilty about not being professionally teaching the language. So because it kind of already become a predominant approach rather than just an approach. Like a choice for a group of students to do. So this is not really giving opportunities for other approaches to have their own space, to develop their own approaches, and also for teachers to think, hey, I can perhaps develop my own pedagogy. But the school gonna say, hey, no, you can't do this because we have to do immersion approach so that we can speed up the learning process. And this is completely like acquisition driven. You practice, and you probably, for some of the study abroad programs that your research is on. And then I know some of them just give them this on-campus experience, but only allow them to speak Chinese on campus. So they can't go outside. And even though they're going outside, they can't use their first language. For a lot of time, they had no idea what's going on around them. So there needs to be a lot of meaning negotiation, even not, speaking with other people, but in their head, they're thinking about what's going on. But this thinking wouldn't be in a language that they are not familiar with. It's usually the language they are comfortable with. So the problem is we could end up having a large group of students speaking perfect Mandarin or perfect target language, but have very little understanding about the environment, about the culture, about the history, about people just sitting next to them. So this is going to be, if I may, just like a disaster in second language learning, because the goal for foreign language education is to have more people who can respect other people's culture. We can bring, peace to this world. And maybe someday your student's going to be prime minister or someone, really important, playing a major role in the parliament. And then they're going to make big decisions about another group of people, about some other cultures, about another country. So all the kind of their experience back in their foreign language classroom is going to play a role in their decision-making process. Because if they can only speak the language and they have very low level of understanding of people and the culture, and then there will be no respect, there will be no second thought. So they will be completely based on, what's the best for them, for their only one culture in their head, even though they've learned many languages, but they're still like the same old one piece self. So this is not, personally, I don't think this is the goal that we should have for language education. So this is about the ultimate goal for someone to learn a foreign language. But we definitely gonna give a lot of possibilities for teachers in different areas, for students who have different goals when they started their second language learning journey. So it's all fine. But for translanguaging to play a role in this is to allow, to remind us that not everyone is so acquisition driven, and acquisition driven language education may be problematic for a long-term goal of language education. So and also it's not really helpful for us to restore diversity in our language classroom. So I do think, when I was still teaching and doing my master's degree in Beijing, we have a lot of immersion programs sadly emerged, I think in the past 10 years. And some of them are still very, very successful. We must say they've done a great job for promoting Chinese language teaching and learning. And they have established a very successful and profitable model to sustain this kind of teaching and learning. So there's no problem with anybody doing immersion approach or doing a study abroad program with their classroom door closed. So everyone can do their own approaches, but we needed to bear in mind that not all the learners gonna learn a language in the same way. So I think that's what I wanted to say. I wanted to add on to my talk. I'm not criticizing the approaches because this is an option. So if translanguaging is like, you have to do this, you can't do that, this is not really translanguaging. So we wanted to say everything can play a role to suit students' needs, but don't make one of them the only way to do things.
Yes, yes. Thank you for the answer. So yeah, I think it's a very important agenda. It's now started with language education, and personally speaking, I actually hope that the idea of translanguaging could actually challenge the nowadays the English dominant and English only higher education system, right, and publication system. So I think we have a long way to go, but I really appreciate everything that you have talked about and everything you're doing. And due to the limit of time, we have to continue our conversation next time. But thank you so much for giving us so many inspiring ideas and also examples for us to really think about this.
Thank you so much for having me at this the major talk, and also for the follow-up interview, and for giving me all this very thought-provoking questions, because I've been doing research in for like 10 years, but I never thought about explaining my thought in this kind of conversation-based way. So this is really a new experience to me as well. But I think when I was explaining my hope for the future research of translanguaging, I said this is gonna need collective wisdom and collective efforts. So it can't be just one man band when you are talking about a very liberating and transformative approach. So I'm glad we have this conversation here, and I do know some other people and scholars, teachers probably gonna find this video one day, and hopefully what we said in this video gonna be helpful to them as well.
Yeah.
And thank you for all the questions, for your time.
Thank you.